This first one, you won't have heard, is the story I have never told live before in front of an audience. It's in the Nottinghamshire Folk Tales book, and it's also in the new anthology that History Press have done. A story of Old Jackey Peet. And I came across this way back when we lived in Nottingham, in Arnold. I wasn't interested in stories at all then. Storytelling hadn't been invented, if you know what I mean. But I came across the story and I tried to write a song about it, but it never really happened. I had a good chorus, but I couldn't make the verses work. And then when I got to writing Nottinghamshire Folk Tales book, I thought, Jackey Peet, that would be a good one to go in there. And it took me ages to find record of it written down anywhere. I could remember the rough idea, but in the end I found it in a little pamphlet in the local studies library. It goes back to 1700s, and Jackey Peet lived in Nottingham in those days, when Nottingham was just quite a small town, and he was a well-known character. You know, these days, or those days they called him a character. In these days he'd have all kinds of things, medical things and physical things, diagnoses wrong with him. But in those days he was just Jackey Peet. Oh, he's the local character, you know, a bit of a strange person. And one of his symptoms was his size. He loved eating, and he'd eat and eat and eat. He was incapable of stopping eating if there was food there. So he'd just keep on going and eat everything in sight. And so his waist measurement was more than his height. And the other thing that he really loved was badges and medals and brooches. He collected them. He'd go around the streets looking for buttons that people had dropped and things like that. And he'd sew them all over his coat. So you imagine this big, little, round person with buttons and badges all over his coat. And his favourite one was a big badge that had come off a piece of furniture, and he had it stuck up here like a big medal. And people liked him. He was, as I say, he was a character. People liked him. Everyone knew him. He wasn't very bright, but you know, he got on well with everyone. The only time he really thrived was at Goose Fair every year for the pie eating competition. He won that every year without fail, because as soon as the pies were there, he'd rushing them in. The story I'm going to tell you about Jackey Peet happened one day. He was just mooching around the lanes and the alleyways in his part of the town, which was the old sort of poor part of the town, and his nose suddenly twitched. He could smell cooking meat, and so he followed where this smell was coming from, and it took him down a little alleyway which was only just wide enough for him to squeeze down, and he stopped outside a particular house, just a blank wall, and sniff. It was definitely coming from there, and just wattle and daub walls in that part of the town, and there was a little crack down the wall, and so he poked it and twiddled out a little tiny bit of filling and stuck his nose up to this gap. Yeah, the smell of cooked meat, cooking meat, was definitely coming from in there. And it was a rather poor quality wall, and he found he was able to pull out little bits, and he pulled out, made a little hole that he could peek through, and he could see into a pantry. And in this pantry there were freshly cooked pies, and there were hanging bits of cooked meat, and he couldn't resist it. This little hole he pulled away and tugged away, made it bigger and bigger, and he just about managed to make it big enough for him to squeeze through. And Jackey Peet, in a pantry full of cooked food, well, it was his idea of heaven. And he started to eat and eat and eat and eat, and he ate the whole pantry full of food. And then when he stopped, he heard noises coming from elsewhere in the house, the people who the house belonged to had obviously been out. They were just coming home. He thought, you better disappear quick. But trouble is, he had eaten so much, he was now too big to get out through the hole he'd come in through. And he couldn't make the hole any bigger because of the big oak beams that the wall was made of. He got the wattle and daub out of it, but he couldn't make the hole any bigger. And so Jacky Peet was stuck there in this pantry. And you can imagine the people's reaction when they came in and found all their food disappeared and Jacky Peet slumped in the corner. And they called the law, and Jacky was taken away and put in the stocks. And to add insult to injury, thinking of what Jacky Peet loved, when he was there in the stocks, they threw food at him, and that really made him suffer. Didn't cure him, if anything, of course. He was still a fanatic for food and his badges and so on. And so that's the story of Jacky Peet.